Good afternoon, everybody. We've got about 4 minutes until the start, but thanks for joining us and for being early and on time. We'll get started right at noon. We'll talk to you soon. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Happy Valentine's Day, happy Statehood Day, happy Friday before a 3-day weekend, whichever one of those you're celebrating. We appreciate that you're spending some time here with us at WIFA to talk a little more about the next round of water conservation grant funding. I'm going to do a couple minutes of housekeeping while we wait for everybody else to jump on the call, and then I'll turn it over to Assistant Director for Water Projects, Lindsay Jones, to give you the actual meat of today's webinar. First of all, as you've noticed, you are muted right now upon entering the webinar. That just helps us minimize background noise. You'll actually stay muted for the entire presentation section of the webinar. So if you do have questions as Lindsay's talking, please use the Q&A box to ask those questions. I will be monitoring that box, and if it's something that I think makes sense to kind of interrupt and ask Lindsay at the time, I'll go ahead and do that. After the presentation, we can open it up for open discussion. If you have questions at that point, just use the raise hand feature on your Zoom. I'll try to call on folks in the order in which they raise their hand, and then you can actually ask those questions and back and forth in real time. I also do want to note that this presentation is being recorded, and that's so that we can make a copy of it available on our website after the fact. We will be sharing that link with our Water Conservation Grant Fund mailing list. So if you're on that list, you should also receive a link to the web or to the recording. But just also keep that in mind as you're asking your questions too. I think that's all of the housekeeping that I had. So with that, I will turn it over to Lindsay and I will let her get onto what you're all here for.
All right, thank you so much, Chelsea. So definitely an exciting time right now. But to just kind of back up a little bit, I'll go over just a recap of the initial round of funding through the Conservation Grant Fund. We can go to the next slide here. So we are now working towards having a new Water Conservation Grant Fund open, but to talk about what happened previously, we had the initial fund was created in 2022, and the real goal of the program was to bring new conservation activities online by funding programs and projects that result in long-term sustainable reductions in water use. So we had the initial funding of $200 million, which we awarded. Now that has been bumped up to $214 million, so $14 million now additionally available of the American Rescue Plan Act money, or ARPA funds. The grant funds are, we are able to give out up to $3 million per program with a available 25% match is going to be required for all grant projects. And eligible applicants include governmental entities, tribes, water companies, and other water providers, as well as non-governmental organizations which are focused on water conservation and environmental issues, and which are partnering with one of the eligible entities listed. The next slide. When the Conservation Fund was created in 2022, it was funded with the $200 million that I mentioned of the ARPA funds. Those are also known as COVID relief funds. So in 2022, we had to not only stand up a brand new program, but we had to do it all in time to get the money allocated by June 30th of 2024. That's exactly what we did. We opened those applications back in April of 2023, and by November of 2023, we had more than 260 applications to review for just about $300 million in demand from water users all throughout the state. So we worked really hard, our staff, our committee, and our board worked diligently to analyze those applications, and ultimately the board was able to approve over 180 projects, which are expected to be saving as much as 5.5 million acre-feet of water over their lifetimes. We really tried to take a comprehensive approach by selecting the projects and making sure that we said yes to the very best ones. And now we're excited to be able to say yes to a few more projects with an additional funding allocation. Go to the next slide here. So in late December, Governor Hobbs informed us that she was going to be allocating an additional $14.1 million of funds to continue the momentum that our grant program and our grantees had already built in the initial rounds. So WIFA is opening an entirely new round of funding to award out this additional funds, and we have begun accepting grant applications as we speak. Since it's been a while since we last were accepting applications, we thought it'd be good to do a brief refresher, as well as highlight some of the things that are a little bit different about this second round of funding. So for the timing of this grant application, we are, as I said, accepting applications right now. They're going to be due on March 6th. That is a very aggressive time frame, and the reason for that is because we still need to comply with the ARPA deadlines. So if awarded, grantees are going to have to agree to the benchmarks outlined on the screen here. And if you already have a grant under a previous cycle, you'll be familiar with those last two benchmarks. However, that August benchmark is a new one, and that will only apply to our new grants being awarded right now. It is important to note that we're not going to be able to consider any applications for projects with an anticipated completion date that is going beyond June 30th of 2026. So very important to keep that in mind as you're preparing your applications. For the application, there are a couple of new things in the application as compared to last time. Because we now have WIFA rules that are final, we have an actual definition of project versus program. So a program would be an activity that occurs in multiple phases over an established time frame and that may result in multiple deliverables. they can get up to $3 million maximum. A project would be an activity that's confined to a particular time and place and that result in a single deliverable, and they can get up to $250,000 maximum. And for any of our repeat applicants, if you've already applied for a previous program or project and gotten those maximum dollar amounts, make sure any new applications are going to be for distinct new projects or programs, because we will have to be evaluating that as the maximums. For one other addition for the application that we added, we will be having applicants self-select a conservation category that WIFA will use for our analysis purposes. Those are listed on the screen here. There is also an option for an other category if you feel your application doesn't fit into one of those categories. Staff does reserve the right to modify your selection if upon review your project actually fits into one category versus another better. And then additionally, only one category will be allowed per application. So for example, if you want to apply for both an advanced meter project and a turf removal project, you would need to submit 2 separate applications. Additionally, we're asking for documentation on any prior water use so that it can help to provide some context for the impact of the conservation activity. An additional addition for the new application, because of the accelerated timeframe for this grant program, we are asking for some more details regarding the duration of the project. So we have this additional question where you can provide information regarding the work planned or the work already completed, along with the estimated dollar amounts for the various timeframes within the grant period. You will see that first bullet point lists July of 2022 through the date of anticipated award. This would be the section where you want to add any information regarding your pre-award costs that you would like to be included either for grant reimbursement or to count towards the match requirement. Pre-award costs are eligible for grant or match as long as they're within the board approved scope of work and they occur after July 6, 2022. And additionally, if you are wanting to be reimbursed with grant dollars, those activities would need to have followed all of the grant requirements, such as procurement requirements for this grant program. So speaking of funding requirements, the funding requirements remain the same as the previous rounds because this is still the ARPA funds, as I've mentioned. So that is going to include any procurement requirements through 2 CFR 200, as well as all the applicable provisions of the terms and conditions of the ARPA funds. Additionally, funds will be distributed on a reimbursement basis after expenses have been paid by the grantee. We do allow for indirect costs for grant reimbursement. So we will accept if an applicant has a negotiated indirect cost rate already, we will accept that rate with the documentation. Or if there isn't a negotiated rate, the de minimis rate of up to 15% would be accepted, but the indirect cost may not count towards the match requirement. For the evaluation criteria, those remain the same. So the Conservation Committee will be evaluating the extent of long-term sustainable reductions in water use, improved efficiency, and improved reliability, the cost and benefits. They'll evaluate if grant funding is better fit than SRF funding, the ability of a project or program to provide multiple benefits, the degree to which other funding sources are leveraged, the applicant's qualifications and capacity, the feasibility of the program or project, and then public comments. For the review process, this will remain the same as previous cycles. However, unlike last time, we are planning to have all applications in hand for the committee to review in one fell swoop, so no cycles within a cycle like we did previously. We are anticipating the initial step will be WIFA is going to complete the review of the applications, present them to our conservation committee. The committee will review all the materials, have discussions about those applications. We'll invite the applicants to those meetings in case the committee has any questions. And then the committee will make recommendations to the WIFA board. The WIFA board will meet and then ultimately determine if a grant will be awarded and may modify or adjust any budgets for individual grants or grants as a whole. So for the anticipated timeline, as stated, it is a very aggressive timeline, and that is in order to try to get grants awarded as quickly as possible. So you all have as much time as possible to spend these funds. So we have March 6th is the application due date. We are anticipating a committee study session the week of March 24th, and then a committee meeting to vote to make recommendations the week of April 1st, with the intent to get all of the grant applications before the WIFA board at our April 16th meeting. So these dates are tentative and subject to change, but this is what our goal and our hope is to achieve. And then just quickly, some resources for anyone interested in applying. Definitely encourage you to visit our website and the Water Conservation Grant Fund landing page, which is linked here. You'll find all sorts of very useful information about the program, helpful links, previously recorded webinars, as well as this is where the current webinar will be posted for a review after the fact. Additionally, this is where you can find the link to get to the application portal. So we are working through the same application portal as previously. So that's the eCivis portal. You can find it by going to the grants.az.gov website. If you scroll to the Finance Authority, we have one solicitation right now open for applications, which is this grant fund. If you click on that, you'll find the funding opportunity. There's the little box where it says apply. Click there, and that'll take you to the eCivis application portal, which you can walk you through the next steps. Additionally, on this page, you'll find the documents associated with this grant program, including the Excel budget table. So you'll want to make sure you download all of those documents and use them for your application process. For the application itself, this is just a view of what the eCivis application should look like for you. There's 3 steps, basically. You'll want to complete the application itself, the certification form, and then the budget table. And it's important for the budget table, just briefly, you'll want to upload the Excel budget table in the little upload section right in the middle there. And then you will also want to edit the budget table. If you scroll up to the bottom of the screen, there's the application, budget, and goals section. You click on the 3-lined bar there. That will allow you to edit the budget table in eCivis. We do recommend that you work on the Excel budget table first. Make sure you have all the numbers perfect in there, and then transfer those to the eCivis table. So this is an example of the Excel budget table and what it should look like. Just to briefly go over it, because I realize it's a little confusing for some people, and we are requesting to make things a little simpler, to just use one for the units for every single category. If you have additional information, for example, if you know that you're trying to purchase 100 meters and you wanted to note that, we ask that you provide those details in the budget justification section and not in the budget table. Additionally, please don't add rows to the budget table and just use the one row for each category. So this example would be if you were requesting $250,000 for equipment, you were going to have a cost share or a matching amount of $62,500. This is how you would complete that table. You will enter the total amount in the unit cost. That will automatically update the extended cost, and then you will determine how much for grant dollars, which is the direct cost, versus how much for matching dollars, which is the cost share. So direct cost plus cost share should equal the total activity cost, which will populate down here. And then additionally, if indirect costs are going to be included, please don't use the indirect cost column, which is grayed out here. Instead, use the indirect row, which I know is slightly confusing, but the reason this Excel table is set up this way is because it's going to mirror exactly what you're going to see in the eCivis budget table. It just looks a little bit different. So if we go to the next slide here, we have just an example of what you'll see in eCivis. To edit the eCivis budget, when you're in here, you're going to click, if you wanted to add cost for the personnel, click on personnel. It'll drop down this table down here, and then you'll enter the same information the same way that you entered into the Excel table. Again, please don't add rows to the budget table. If you have indirect costs, you will add them in the indirect cost category, so number 8, and then provide any additional details that you would like to describe, the number of units of meters or number of personnel you plan to have working on these projects. You can provide those details in the budget justification section. So I believe that was our last slide, and yeah, I'm happy to open it for questions.
All right. Well, thanks, Lindsay. While attendees kind of get their wits about them and think about questions they might want to ask live, first of all, attendees, please use the raise hand feature to ask those questions live, and then I'll just allow your mic, unmute your mic, and you'll be able to ask those. I will go over a few of the Q&A that we received during the presentation, just so that everybody can see them and knows what the answers to those were. First of all, we had a request to repeat the start date for the funds eligible for reimbursement on that pre-award cost. That's July 6th, 2022. So to be eligible, pre-award costs must have been expended after July 6th, 2022. A couple folks asked whether the presentation will be posted, and the answer is yes. We will post a copy of the presentation along with the recording from today on the Water Conservation Grant Fund landing page. You can find that by going to azwifa.gov, clicking on funding options, and scrolling down to Water Conservation Grant Funds. So all of it will be right there on the landing page. One of the other questions was, what is the expected date for notification of awards? Our plan is to have those applications to our board at their April meeting, which will be on the 16th of April. Applicants will be notified immediately after and during the board meeting as well. We would invite you to participate in that. So if all goes according to plan, that would be the date of the application, the date of announcement. I also had a question of whether programs need to be complete by June of 2026, and the answer is yes. Any money that is awarded through this grant must be expended by June of 2026. Very aggressive timeline. We're going to hammer that home many, many times because that is a very key aspect of this. So if your project or program cannot be complete by June of 2026, unfortunately, it's not going to be a good fit for this round of funding. So there've been quite a few questions that have come in since then, but I'm going to go ahead and allow Elaine to ask her question. Elaine, I've enabled your mic. You'll just have to unmute yourself and then feel free to ask. Elaine, are you able to unmute your mic?
Okay, is that okay?
Yes, it is.
Perfect.
All right, go ahead.
Elaine Clayton, Black Canyon City Water Improvement District. I have been board chair for about 40 days, and we have never applied for any grants. And I'm wondering, do you have any recommendations or support you could offer for grant writers so we could apply?
So,
hello?
Yeah, we don't necessarily have any one that we would recommend. That would definitely be a little outside of our realm, but we hope that the application is fairly straightforward. And as far as, giving you support on logistical support, technical support, our staff can help you kind of walk you through the e-Civis process. But as far as actually writing the grant application, that would be something that you all
And who would provide that?
To provide the grant writing?
Who, if I needed to email someone to ask for support in writing the grant, who would I contact?
So no one at WIFA would be able to support you in writing the grant. We can support you in any technical support, logistical support as far as getting through the process. But because it's a competitive grant program, we will be limited in being able to provide support in actually writing the application.
Okay, who could help me with the technical aspect then?
So if you have any technical questions, you can email the wcgf@azwifa.gov application or email, and we can respond to you there.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thanks, Elaine. All right, now we'll go to Sandra Hurlbert from Surprise. Sandra, I have enabled your mic. You'll just have to unmute. Sandra, we can't hear you if you're talking. I'm not sure. It looks like you're unmuted, but still can't hear you.
Okay, how about now?
Now you can. Yep.
Oh, very good. Okay. Yeah, I had to play with all the different settings. So we have a current water conservation rebate program that we're ahead of schedule, and we plan on actually having it finished out by this June. So we wanted to kind of change the next grant that we're seeking for a program that's focused on just HOA turf removals. And I just wanted to make sure that that is going to be considered a distinct proposal, because, you know, the other one was for irrigation controllers and xeriscape and single family turf, and it also included an HOA turf component. But we are changing it and opening, you know, increasing the cost per square foot and also increasing the parcel size. So I just wanted to make sure that we would still be eligible to apply as a new program.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it right on the nail on the head there, Sandra. It's making sure to make those distinctions on what makes this a new program compared to the program. If you've already been awarded $3 million under a previous program, what makes this new and distinct from that previous program, putting those in the applications, and you know, we'll evaluate them as they come in. So it's difficult to say definitely yes or definitely no right now without all of the details, but from what you said, it sounds like it would be a distinct new program. So having that in mind, though, while you're creating your applications and thinking about the programs you're setting up is definitely important.
Yeah, and I'm glad you kind of made that distinction too. And so with that in mind, the way you defined it, if we set this up, then it would be, the expectation would be that this particular HOA program at the higher amount and larger parcel size would be continuing going forward in order to make it a program. Is that correct?
Yeah, that sounds correct.
Okay. All right. That's it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Sandra. All right, now we're going to move to Jenny Davis from NFF. Jenny, I've enabled your mic. You'll have to unmute and then you can ask your question.
Hi there. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
You can. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, Jenny here with the National Forest Foundation. Wondering if, you know, non-profits, NGOs, do we have to partner with an eligible entity, or can we apply on our own? I know we need like an MOU or proof of partnership, but does it have to be a co-application, or can we apply on our own?
Yeah, so if you are an NGO and you have, I mean, you'll want to make sure that partnership is secured before you're submitting your application, but then the application can come from you, and then we will have a partnership, basically attestation form that we would send to you to have your partner sign off that yes, they are a partner on this, but the NGO could apply and should, yeah, be the applicant within the eCivis portal.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, so we have quite a few questions coming in through the Q&A. So I will ask the first one that came from David Carr. David and his system have been installing new meters. So he wonders whether the cost of these meters could be applied to the 25% match on the grant.
Yep, great question, David. Absolutely, as long as it's activities have occurred after July 6th of 2022, and then the board would be approving, you know, if the board approved the meter project, costs that you are having as pre-award costs could count towards the match requirement. So absolutely.
All right. And I did just send an answer via the chat, but I will say this online too. There's an applicant that's asking if they're looking at 2 possible projects, can they submit 2 separate applications for a single applicant? The answer is absolutely you can. Just keep in mind that there's limited funds. So that might mean that the board's kind of hesitant to award an application or to award funds to the same applicant. They may want to spread the love a little bit. So make it clear if you do end up submitting multiple applications, which one is your top priority. That'll help staff as we are prepping the board and prepping the committee to have them look at your grant applications. I'll also take this one if you want me to, Lindsay, but the question is, do you anticipate any future funding under this grant program, or is the 14.1 million the final amount being allocated? I will say 14.1 million is the final amount being allocated under ARPA funding. So for the federal COVID relief money that we're using right now to fund this program, 14.1 million is going to be the end of it. I'm pretty confident in saying that just because of the timelines. However, WIFA has included in our budget request, and we are actively lobbying down at the Capitol for the state to include more money from state general funds or finding another funding source. So we definitely don't want this to be the end of the Water Conservation Grant Fund generally. We've not yet identified what that next source of funding will be, but we're working diligently with our policymakers to say there needs to be a next source of funding. We just don't know that for certain yet. So definitely 14.1 is the final amount for now and the final amount of federal money, but we're working on getting some state money into the program too. Next question is going to be for you, Lindsay. What steps need to be taken to set up an eCivis account? SAM.gov, UEI, what do we need to do that?
So eCivis account should be pretty straightforward. If you don't have one already and you click the link to apply now, it should, like a lot of other websites, take you through the process to set up an account, and you really just need a email account to set up an eCivis account. But to apply, your entity will have to have a UEI number. So you will need to go through the SAM.gov portal to get a UEI number if you don't have one already. So to get into eCivis, fairly straightforward, but yes, you will need a UEI.
Next question is, can you say a little more about how you're defining direct costs versus indirect costs?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, direct costs, things directly related to the grant project. So it'd be, working hours to put in the meters, the cost of purchasing meters, all of those kind of really direct costs would be included. Indirect costs are things that support an organization's overall operations, but aren't directly tied to the specific project. So they could include things like administrative salaries, utilities, office supplies, little things like that. So to cover those costs, organizations can use the indirect cost category. And like I said, it's up to 15% if you're using the de minimis, or if you have a negotiated indirect cost rate already, submit that to us and we will accept that negotiated rate.
Does the board tend to approve funding for staff time in proposals, or do we often ask grantees to modify the staff time or modify staff time requests?
In the previous rounds, I can't remember there being a specific time where they took out staff time specifically. I think there was, occasionally a concerns if someone was trying to pay for the salary of a certain position for an extended time frame that went beyond even what our grant program allowed. I can remember that coming up, but staff time to achieve the purpose of the grant project, I don't remember ever being an issue. So.
Yep, I'd agree with that. I'll take this next one too. The question is, are these funds considered at risk considering recent federal funding freezes? Thankfully, the answer is no. So ARPA funding has already been deposited essentially into the state's bank accounts. That is not something that we're still waiting on EPA or any other federal agency to disperse to the state. So we have been assured by the governor's office and others that this money is completely safe in terms of the programs that we have set up. So we are not worried. We are not concerned that these will be frozen under the executive orders or anything else that's going on. So rest assured, continue the applications. If you're a current grantee, it's business as usual. If you are applying under this, we do not have that sort of time pressure or risk of those being clawed back or being frozen by the EOs. So thankfully, all is well on that front. Next question is, can the 25% match be spent prior to the award of the conservation grant?
Yep, absolutely. So pre-award costs that occur after July 6, 2022 are eligible to count towards the match requirement or towards the grant requirement.
And the next question is very similar. So can funds that are spent between notification of the award and the actual anticipated award date be reimbursed by the grant? And so again, the answer of that would be yes. Pre-award costs that are spent after that July 22nd, 2023, 2022, July 6, 2022. Too many dates to keep in mind. As long as they are spent after that date, pre-award costs may be reimbursed.
Yeah, the important thing with that is to always remember, if you're asking for grant dollars, they have to, those pre-award costs still would have to comply with all of the grant requirements. So making sure you did federal procurement if you're asking for grant dollars. If you're asking for it to count towards the match, then it really just needs to make sure that it was within the board approved scope of work that you are then requesting those as match dollars.
We do have one applicant that's having issues with creating the account. And so I'm actually just going to put the wcgf@azwifa.gov email into the answer to that. Send us an email there, copy that same error message that you typed into the Q&A box, and we'll be able to get a project manager or somebody else to help you with that error message. So thanks very much for your patience and sorry about that. Okay, Mariko asks, are there avenues to continue the project after June 2026? As it reads, all the funds need to be allocated by the end of June. Could we provide match after that date in order to finish the project?
So we do want all of the projects to plan to be completely finished. That includes grant and match dollars by that June 2026 date. As far as flexibility to have some of the match come in a little bit after, we'll provide as much flexibility as we can for the grant dollars to be available after that date. It's less of a determination that WIFA can make, and that will go now to other, to provide that information by December of 2026, though, the ARPA deadline to spend all of these funds comes up, and then federal treasury is taking back any funds that haven't been spent. So keep those in mind. And some of those questions are kind of outside of our control, but we'll provide as much flexibility as we can, certainly.
Definitely. Janelle is asking to please elaborate on the requirements for projects to be distinct from what has been previously funded through this grant.
Yeah, so I mean, it's because we have in statute maximums of per project, we can give 250,000 per program, we can give $3 million. If you are a repeat applicant, it's going to be important to look at what you previously were awarded for, how much it was awarded for, and then any new applications, you're just going to need to make sure you can justify this being a new project or a new program.
All right, next question. Can this grant be used to replace water lines that go to residents?
It can, if you can justify there being a water conservation benefit to that water line replacement project.
Yep, and similar question next. Would artificial turf replacement on all of the stadium fields be a water conservation activity? Just like Lindsay said, as long as you can justify that as a conservation activity and show that artificial turf is using less water than the natural turf, then yes, absolutely an eligible use. You touched on this a little bit as well, but it says, what are the consequences of failing to spend the funds by the June 2026 benchmark? Understand the importance of being reasonable and realistic, but we're not sure about the exact degree to which the interest from the community will actually be carried out in the limited time frame.
Fair enough, and we understand it is an aggressive time frame. The reason for that time frame, though, again, is ARPA deadline is December 2026. At that point, federal treasury is going to come and take away any money that is remaining. There's a 6-month buffer window in there, and that is one to help make sure that any requests that you are submitting to us that we then submit to the governor's office are able to be processed in time to meet that deadline. We'll offer as much flexibility as we can, but ultimately will come down to a federal treasury coming to take these funds away at some point. So,
yep. Wish we had more control, but unfortunately, unfortunately we don't.
We would have loved to give you all much more time to spend this money. So.
It also gives us more time, but hey. So the next question is about geography and location. And it says, in the past, most of the school awards for turf replacement were in rural areas. We're in the Phoenix metro area, but we play an important role in the community. What else is WIFA looking for to see them as a priority project? I'll take a first crack at that, Lindsay, and then come in after me as well. But I would say that really there wasn't necessarily a particular priority. I think we just received a lot of applications for turf removal in rural areas. So I don't think that was necessarily an intentional choice of the committee or the board. And I would say that if you look back, especially at prior committee meetings, board meetings, a really big aspect of what our board and committee liked to see were the co-benefits of these projects. So there is that main benefit of water conservation in a particular way, but was there a co-benefit in that it was a particularly sensitive water source, or looking at that community impact for sure. So just continue to show us the impact of that project. I don't think that being in the Phoenix metro area puts you at a disadvantage at all. Just make sure that you're really explaining what the benefit of this is going to be, both from an environmental and resource standpoint, and also from a community benefit standpoint. Next question, is NEPA required for restoration projects on private land?
So the funding source for this will not trigger NEPA requirements. However, your project may have NEPA requirements based on the project details. So I can't say for certain that NEPA won't apply to any specific project, but the funding source will not require NEPA to be implemented.
Okay. Next question, are the grant amount maximums of $250 and $3 million inclusive of the 25% match? So in other words, does the WIFA cost share 25% or 75% of those maximums? Great question. It's one that we had to clarify a bunch of times in the last round. The 250 and the 3 million is how much WIFA can provide. So if you have a full $3 million grant amount, your 25% match would then be 25% of the 3 million, so $750,000. So it means that your total project cost would be $3,750,000, not just the 3 million. I might have just made that more confusing, but hopefully that answer came across. WIFA is able to give a total of 3 million, total of 250,000. The grantee then would match the total cost that WIFA, match 25% of the total cost. Next question. I'm a private company working toward building water generation towers. To get grant funding, do I need to partner with existing water districts? The answer would be yes. As a private company, you do need to be working with an eligible entity. So you could approach a water company, approach another eligible entity to explain the benefit of the project, and then find a way to fit that within the eligible entity's grant application within their processes. The other question is, do you need to purchase land within the district? The answer would be no. You don't need to have a real estate or any kind of stake in the district. You just need to have an eligible entity that is applying to utilize the product in the way that you are looking at from a water conservation standpoint. Lindsay, anything to add to that?
No, that's great.
Okay. I also did want to mention before I go to the next question, for our applicant that was asking about local grant writing support, a couple of really helpful suggestions in the comments. First was to look at Local First's Economic Recovery Center. So Local First Arizona is a really, really helpful resource, especially for small rural grantees or borrowers. So I definitely recommend that you look at that. Also had somebody add in the chat for Elaine that grantprofessionals.org is a good place for you to go to. So Elaine, really helpful suggestions in there, hopefully something that you can take advantage of. All right, next few questions. Does a nonprofit co-op have a priority in the program?
I would say not necessarily. I mean, again, it goes back to what Chelsea was saying previously. If you can describe lots of community benefits and other kind of co-benefits because of the type of applicant you are, add those to your application, and it's something the committee will evaluate.
Okay. Getting down to the last couple of questions. So applicants, if there's more we haven't covered or something else you're curious about, raise your hand. Feel free to use the Q&A box. But this last one is describing a system, a small gravity driven stormwater treatment plant that discharges treated water directly into groundwater. Not really a question, but I think maybe the implied question is, would this kind of a treatment plant be eligible if it was installed in sort of, storage drainage structures? I think, again, as long as you can show a water conservation benefit to that, that could absolutely be an eligible use of the funding. And again, highlighting co-benefits as well. There could be a conservation benefit and also a recharge benefit, or also a groundwater benefit Good ways to sort of package that. Next question would be, will it cover drilling a second well? I would say that's highly unlikely unless you can show a conservation benefit of the well. If the first well is failing, if it's leaking, if there's a whole lot of water loss associated with that, and then drilling a second well would then allow you to avoid that. Possibly, I think there's an argument to be made there, but it really is that reduction in water use or additional efficiency in water use that we're looking for. Next question is from Tal, and how does reimbursement flow? Great question, Lindsay. You want to talk about that?
Absolutely. So it is a slightly complicated process because one, we have federal dollars that are flowing through Treasury to the governor's office and then governor's office to WIFA. So reimbursements, as we stated, the grantee will have to pay cost up front and then request reimbursements, submit to WIFA all your proof of invoices, proof of payments, all the paperwork. WIFA will evaluate it, submit all of that information to the governor's office. The governor's office has a little time to evaluate it, submits the money to WIFA, who then submits the money to the grantee, who then is reimbursed for those costs. So it is a process, but that is how it's flowing.
And a related question here too, when the applicant requests funds after completion of the work, what do they have to show? Is it a copy of the checks that were written to pay for approved services? What kind of documentation needs to happen in that reimbursement request?
Right, yeah, so proof that the invoice or whatever cost that was incurred was paid. It could be copies of checks, it can be screenshots of bank accounts, redacted, kind of bank statements, all of that kind of information. As long as we have that some type of proof that the cost was paid, then we should be good and we can work with you all on what that entails.
Yep. Next question we have, is there a higher concern or priority for utilities that rely on certain water sources like groundwater or Colorado River?
It certainly was a discussion point for our committee in the previous rounds. So it's something, it's one of the questions within the application to make sure you are telling us what source of water you are saving, and certainly, you know, any benefits to the Colorado River or groundwater, I think were highly talked about in previous rounds. So.
Yep. Next question is whether there's a list of eligible entities in Maricopa County. We don't have a list, a granular list of all eligible entities, but if you do go to our statute or you go to the Water Conservation Grant Fund landing page, the statutory language is going to be the best way to determine whether you fall within that list. So we kind of use, you know, a colloquial language to talk about who those eligible entities are. And let me see if I actually have that up here somewhere. I think we do. So, you know, we talk about government entities like cities, towns, and districts, tribal entities, private water companies, natural resource conservation districts. Essentially anything that's created under a statute in Arizona would be an eligible entity. Reminder that there is no geographic restriction or requirement for this program. We do have some of those for other programs here at WIFA, but it doesn't matter what county you're located in to be an eligible entity. You just have to be one of the things within the statute. All right, Lindsay, next one's for you. Back to costs. If project costs are submitted monthly, what-ish is the turnaround time for reimbursement?
The difficult question, John, it's going to partly depend on how complicated your reimbursement requests are. If it's a 5-page request with one invoice versus a few hundred pages with things that are missing that need follow-up, it's going to vary, but it is anywhere from 30 days to possibly longer. So.
Kind of a related question here. What documentation needs to be tracked or submitted to provide the match requirement and to make sure that it's being completed throughout the project or program?
Yep, definitely a great question. So as you are requesting grant funds, there'll be a section in the grant reimbursement paperwork where you'll include the dollar amount of match. we ask that as the grants and the projects are ongoing and you're requesting reimbursement for funds, you try to maintain that 25% match requirement. So you'll be providing us with, here's the invoice or the proof that that match was met and the dollar amount. If you need to get grant dollars up front and then plan to kind of meet the match on the back end, we do have some flexibility. There's an extra like certification form that you can submit with your reimbursement request to request those grant dollars up front. But we also want to make sure that everyone is kind of staying on top of their match requirements. So meeting it as you go or meeting all the match up front before you request the grant dollars can kind of help simplify that. So there's flexibility, but by the end of it, you will have to make sure that you met that 25% match requirement. And it's by submitting all of the proof of the cost incurred, the invoices, the payroll things that will show that you met that 25%.
Next one, the process of paying up front and being reimbursed. Low-income area may not have the funds to pay the cost up front. Is there help available from WIFA on that end?
Definitely a great question. It's one that we've gotten a lot. Unfortunately, we really don't have flexibility on the reimbursement basis for this program because it's funding that we're getting through an agreement with the governor's office. The reimbursement basis isn't something we have flexibility on. So providing funds up front for you all instead of doing a reimbursement process really isn't possible right now, although we do have other funding resources like our water supply fund or our state revolving fund where we can do a little more flexibility if you're looking for funding programs that are, and those are cost incurred programs instead of a fully reimbursement programs.
Yeah, I think that's an important note to highlight that this program, because of the federal funding source requirements, is unique to all of our other programs where cost incurred has a slightly different meaning than it does on this program where it's actually you've paid that cost and are getting reimbursed. So if you are one of our SRF borrowers or if you're working with us on the Water Supply Development Revolving Fund, just know that those are different. Water Conservation Grant Fund is unique in that particular requirement. Lindsay, right now that has cleared out our question queue. So I will just remind the folks that are on, and if you do have questions, please continue to ask them. We've got a few more minutes. But I will remind the folks that are here online that a recording of this will be posted to the landing page that is linked on this current slide. Sorry if you're watching this on a mobile device. I know QR codes are really unhelpful in that context, but if you're watching it on a screen, pick up your mobile device, scan the QR code. It'll bring you directly to that landing page. We will have all of the helpful links. That's where we'll post a recording of this, and just make sure that, that's a great place for you to go for your first round of questions. Then if you can't find it, always feel free to email that wcgf@azwifa.gov. So looks like there may be one last question. Would water generation projects be a new type, or would that fit in under water conservation?
I mean, it's difficult to answer that without more details on the project. The Conservation Grant Fund can fund projects that improve efficiency, reduce use, or improve reliability. So there is some flexibility there, but you would have to justify whatever you're applying for as being eligible, and we will evaluate it as we get those.
Yeah. Next was a really good question. Can match funds be recognized if they were awarded from the Small Drinking Water System Fund? Is that considered ADEQ or is that considered WIFA? Because you would have heard us say that matching funds cannot come from WIFA. So Lindsay, what's your thought on SDWS?
My initial thought is most likely no. We could not accept Small Drinking Water System as a match source. We certainly cannot accept the state revolving funds or water supply funds as a matching source because those are WIFA sources. And I want to say no for the small water system, although it's not something I've thought of before that question. So I definitely appreciate the question.
And we will, I would agree with your initial assessment, Lindsay, but we will track that down for sure and provide a more detailed answer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Looks like that's it. Everyone, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us today. We are just continue to be very encouraged by the enthusiasm that you have for these programs, by the momentum that you've built to conserve water across the state. So we're really proud of the work you've done so far. Let's bump up that 5.5 million acre foot number, have even more to brag about with this $14 million. Thanks for your time, your questions, and we look forward to seeing your applications.
Bye, everyone.